So welcome to the last module for Unit 6 learning. This module is module number 30, and it is observational learning. It's a bit shorter than the last one. There are only 3, I believe. Sorry, I'm having some technical issues. Only 3 learning targets. First one, to be able to differentiate observational learning from associative learning and explain how observational learning may be enabled by neural mirroring. Second one, to be able to discuss the impact of prosocial modeling and that of antisocial modeling. And finally, to discuss the violence viewing effect. Some very controversial stuff there. Okay, so what is observational learning? So higher animals, especially humans, learn without direct experience. You've probably noticed this, especially if you've been around children at all, young children. We, as humans, can learn by watching and imitating others. So it's beyond just that association. It's beyond just what, perhaps, it's beyond what Watson and Skinner and Pavlov were really thinking. There are other things involved, and we can learn by watching others. We learn our native language and various other specific behaviors by observing and imitating others. This is called modeling. For instance, a child who sees his sister burn her fingers on a hot stove, that is one way, hopefully, that a child can learn not to touch that stove. So this guy right here, to the left, and you probably know President Obama, but on the left is Albert Bandura, just an amazing psychologist throughout the 20th century. Sorry about the dogs barking. So back to who is Albert Bandura. So he is an eminent psychologist. He was a professor at Stanford for a really long time, shown in this picture, receiving a US National Medal of Science from President Obama. He's the pioneering researcher of observational learning. He's actually someone I'm very fond of in terms of, I studied a lot about him for my doctoral research. That one of his theories that we're not going to get into too much today, but one of his theories is about self-efficacy, and I did a lot of research in the area of self-efficacy and teacher efficacy. But today we're going to be talking about his pioneering research in the field of observational learning. And you've probably heard, maybe some of you have actually heard of this research already. It's pretty well known. And you can see some of the pictures of some of the research that Bandura conducted. And the study that he's most famous for is the Bobo doll study. See these like clown-like doll things here that fall over and come back up? Those are called Bobo dolls. And we're going to talk a little bit about what Bandura found and why he was conducting this study that is showing an adult beating a Bobo doll and then children doing something similar. So what was the research design of this study? A preschooler child works on a drawing, and then an adult in another part of the room builds with Tinker Toys. As the child watches, the adult gets up and for nearly 10 minutes pounds, kicks, and throws around the room a large inflated Bobo doll, yelling things like, sock him in the nose, hit him down, kick him. There's some really aggressive sort of language and some very violent behavior to the Bobo doll. What happened next? The child is then taken to another room filled with appealing toys. Soon the experimenter returns and tells the child she has decided to save these good toys for the other children. She takes the now frustrated child to a third room containing a few toys, including a Bobo doll. Left alone, what does the child do? So compared with children not exposed to the adult model, those who viewed that the model's aggressive actions and language were more likely to lash out at the doll. Observing the aggressive outbursts apparently lowered their inhibitions, but something more seemed to be at work, for the children imitated the very acts they'd observed and used the same very aggressive words they had heard. The takeaway from the Bobo doll study was pretty significant, especially at the time that the study was done. By watching models, this was the takeaway, by watching models, we experience vicarious reinforcement or vicarious punishment, and we learn to anticipate a behavior's consequences in situations like those we are observing. We are especially likely to learn from people we perceive as similar to ourselves, as successful, or as admirable. And this is really, really something that is a continuing conversation within, what kind of exposure should kids have to different forms of media? Is it okay for kids to be watching violent television? We're gonna talk a little more about that at the end of this module. What are some things we need to be concerned about? By watching models, though, it is apparent that kids especially, but all of us, do learn and model the behavior that we see. So just a little comprehension check. Bandura's famous Bobo doll experiment is most closely associated with which of the following? And that would be E, observational learning, that we learn not just by having, connections made between things, associations made, but we also learn by observing what other people are modeling. So we learn by observation, but how does that happen? So neuroscience is really showing us some interesting information in this area. Mirror neurons are in the frontal lobe of our brain. We should know where that is at this point in this class. And they're neurons that some scientists believe fire when we perform certain actions or observe another's action. There's a lot of interest in studying this area. The brain's mirroring of another's action may enable imitation and empathy, according to some researchers. Now, there's a lot of interesting information coming out about mirror neurons. There has been for like over 2 decades now, but to some extent, just like several other things within psychology and neuroscience, small findings often get exaggerated in the popular media, and I've definitely seen that happen with mirror neurons. There is interesting information coming out, but we don't know everything about them, and we don't know exactly how they're connected to imitation and empathy yet. So how is imitation adaptive from an evolutionary perspective? So in one 27-year analysis of a lot of humpback whale observations, 73,790, a single whale in 1980 whacked the water to drive prey fish into a clump. In the years since, this lobtail technique spread among other whales. Really fascinating, right? So we use this imitation to, to learn to do things that help us as organisms. Researchers also trained groups of vervet monkeys to prefer either blue or pink corn by soaking one color in a disgusting tasting solution. 4 to 6 months later, after a new generation of monkey was born, the adults stuck with whatever color they had learned to prefer. On observing them, so did all but one of the 27 monkeys. Humans seem to be really natural imitators. You may have noticed if you've been around young babies, by 8 to 16 months, infants imitate various novel gestures. It's often a fun thing that we do with babies. By 12 months, they look where an adult is looking, and by about 14 months, children imitate acts modeled on TV. I can remember that clearly happening with our 2 boys with the show Backyardigans, if any of you have ever seen that. I still, a decade later, know pretty much all of those episodes and so many of the songs from the Backyardigans. Do we imitate emotions as well? Yes, we find ourselves yawning when others yawn, smiling when others smile, laughing when others laugh, crying when others cry. I'm someone who really has this happen to me. I feel strongly what other people are feeling, especially when it's sadness. And I have to really try to keep it under control because I can really be pulled into the other emotions that others are feeling. Observing others' postures, faces, voices, and writing style, we unconsciously synchronize our own to theirs, which helps us feel what they're feeling. Imitation can help us gain friends, leading us to mimic those we like. So can we feel others' pain? Well, brain activity related to actual pain on the left is mirrored in the brain of an observing loved one. So empathy in the brain shows up in emotional brain areas, but not in the somatosensory cortex, which receives the physical pain input. What is, shifting gears a bit, what is prosocial modeling? So prosocial modeling is positive, constructive, helpful behavior, right? Where we want, these are good things. Prosocial means, positive social behaviors. People who exemplify nonviolent, helpful behavior can also prompt similar behavior in others. This is really important, right? So you may witness this even in your own life, somebody exemplifying a nonviolent stance and being very helpful can often encourage others to have the same kind of behaviors. Watching others help pick up spilled books or coins, or viewing positively themed television programming can produce positive helping behaviors in others. I've noticed this even in coffee shops when someone steps up to open a door for someone else, or move out of the way, or let someone go in a grocery line. You just can almost feel and see the atmosphere change and other people's behavior change a bit as well. Prosocial modeling. So this girl learning nursing skills as well as compassion by observing her mentor in this Humane Society program. So the Humane Society is a wonderful program that helps so many animals. And the point of this picture is to show that modeling those prosocial behaviors is a way that you can teach younger people to learn those behaviors as well. On the other hand, observational learning may also have antisocial effects. This helps us understand why abusive parents might have aggressive children. Not the only reason. We know there's a lot of influence from different biological factors as well, but observational learning may play a part. TV shows, movies, and online videos are all sources of observational learning, among many others. During the first 18 years, most children in developed countries spend more time watching television than they spend in school. The average teen watches more than 4 hours a day, and the average adult 3 hours a day. How violent is television programming? Well, there have been a lot of studies on this. This is something that is continually being researched. Between 1998 and 2006, primetime violence on TV reportedly increased 75%. An analysis of more than 3,000 network and cable programs aired during one closely studied year revealed nearly 6 in 10 featured some sort of violence, and 74% of the violence went unpunished, which is interesting. So what's depicted in violent programming? 58% of violent shows did not depict the victim's pain. Nearly half the incidents involved justified, meaning there was like a reason, justifiable reason for the violence. And nearly half involved an attractive perpetrator. So experimental studies have found that media violence viewing can cause aggression. And this is a visual of this kind of how it can happen with young children. You're watching violent cartoons and the kids get up and start just imitating, right? They imitate what they see. And I've seen this in a personal level from being a parent and working as a nanny a long time ago, or doing lots of babysitting. And those are anecdotal experiences, but experimental studies, remember, the only type of study that can show cause and effect, have found that media violence can cause aggression, and limiting exposure to violent programs seems to have the ability to reduce aggressive behavior. So how does the concept of desensitization impact violent behavior? Viewers become progressively less bothered by the violence. Compared to a control group, subjects express less sympathy for domestic violence victims and rated victims' injuries as less severe. We become desensitized when we are constantly seeing violence. We become, it's that whole concept of if we're being exposed to something consistently over time, we do become desensitized to it. The APA, the American Psychological Association, found that research demonstrates a consistent relation between violent video game use and increases in aggressive behavior, aggressive thoughts, cognitions, and aggressive affect, emotions, and decreases in the things we want to see, the prosocial behavior, the empathy, and the sensitivity to aggression. The American Academy of Pediatrics has advised pediatricians that media violence can contribute to aggressive behavior, desensitization, to violence, nightmares, and fear of being harmed. So both, one of the preeminent mental health organizations and physical health organizations are saying that it does seem that there is this relationship between media violence and some negative outcomes for kids. So this quote right here, let's think about it. 30 seconds worth of glorification of a soap bar sells soap. 25 minutes worth of glorification of violence sells violence. Something really to think about when we are wondering about the connection between viewing violence on television or in other media domains or in real life and what effect that can have. So let's review our learning targets. I believe there were 3. Differentiate observational learning from associative learning. Observational learning involves learning by watching and imitating rather than learning just the associations between events. We learn to anticipate a behavior's consequences because we experience vicarious reinforcement or vicarious punishment. Think about vicarious as living through someone. Hopefully parents aren't trying to vicariously live through their children, but that's what vicarious means. You can experience it by sort of being able to feel what someone else is living through, what they're going through. Explain how observational learning may be enabled by neural mirroring. Our brain's frontal lobes have shown ability to mirror the activity of another's brain. Really interesting information in the neuroscience field in that area. The same areas fire when we perform certain actions as when we observe someone else performing those actions. Some psychologists believe mirror neurons are what enable this process. Discuss the impact of prosocial modeling of antisocial behavior. Children tend to imitate what a model does and says, whether the behavior being modeled is prosocial, being good, pro, or antisocial, bad. If a model's actions and words are inconsistent, children may imitate the hypocrisy they observe. Fascinating thought there. Finally, discuss the violence viewing effect. Media violence does appear to contribute to aggression. This violence viewing effect may be prompted by imitation and desensitization. Correlation does not equal causation, but study participants have reacted more cruelly when they have viewed violence. Okay, and we are at the end of module number 30. Thank you for listening. Take care.